Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be running through some of the force feedback settings since the December update, and I'm just going to give you a visual representation of what the different scales now do, because there's quite a few different settings that you get to play with now. So we're just going to dive right into the advanced options for our steering wheel, and we're going to scroll straight down to our force feedback scale and all that. I'm not going to go through the dead zones because dead zones are very straightforward. If you don't know what they are, I'm sure you'll be able to find the information out there somewhere. If you do want to know what they are and you can't be bothered looking, just leave a comment down below and I'll explain it in detail for you. But for now, the main thing we want to focus on are our force feedback settings. Vibration scale is pretty straightforward, just controls the volume of the vibrations. I run it off. Force feedback scale controls the volume of the overall dynamic force that comes through the steering wheel. So basically anything that's calculated from the physics and gets pushed through the force feedback system, this is going to be controlled in that volume. So this is separate from vibration, I believe. It was before, I'm pretty sure it still is. But if you want to go into detail, I'll leave a link in the description to the advanced setting descriptions on the Forza support page, because there's a lot of information in there to soak in. So force feedback scale controls the volume. Aligning torque scale controls the combined curves of the mechanical and pneumatic trail. Now this is where things start to get a little bit technical, so I've put together a couple of graphs that we can have a look at while we talk. So these are going to be basically our three aligning torque, mechanical trail and pneumatic trail sliders. So what's going to happen is basically if I want to adjust the aligning torque scale, so we'll start from the top. So aligning torque scale is this blue line here, and this basically just adjusts the scale, the force feedback scale of those two torques combined. Now this is very close to what the force feedback scale does, except this is just purely done on the aligning torque. So if there's any of the road fill or any other extra bits of information that are applied on top of this, the force feedback scale is going to amplify those as well, whereas the aligning torque scale is purely just scaling the aligning torques. So that's what that one does, so we'll leave that there for now. The next one is our mechanical trail scale, which if we find our slider for that one, where has it gone? Here it is. No, that's not the one, this one. Okay, so the green line is our mechanical trail torque. So basically, as the tyre slips and we get to this peak slip angle of 1, which is 100% of the slip angle, you'll see our steering torque from mechanical torque is in line with that. So when the car is at peak lateral force, which is at 1, the steering torque from mechanical torque is at the same point, and basically this builds up with the lateral force of the car and then will drop off as the tyre is pushed past, just as the g-force the car is pulling will do almost exactly the same thing. And this happens because the mechanical trail scale is a set distance in the suspension geometry of the car that the contact patch of the wheel trails behind the rotating axis of the steering. So basically, the more lateral force that's applied to it, the more torque that's going to come through the steering wheel. And this is what that slider controls. It just purely controls that that mechanical feeling you get through the steering wheel. Now, pneumatic trail is a little bit different, because not only does a tyre stretch and deform, it makes it so that the trailing distance of the tyre itself is quite dynamic, and this is why we have a much different curve, and I've matched this curve very closely to what Turn 10 uses in their force feedback. So this is a pretty good representation to be able to compare this while we're talking. So as the tyre builds up torque, the peak torque that you'll feel in the steering wheel actually happens well before the peak lateral force of the car, which is at 1 here. So in Forza's force feedback, from pneumatic trail, and you can feel this if you turn mechanical trail all the way off and turn your road feel off. You'll purely feel the curve, the torque curve generated by the tyre, and this is what you're going to feel. And it peaks between 50 and 60%, and then very, very quickly drops off, and you get almost no force feedback when you push past the peak slip of the tyre. And unfortunately, Turn 10 hasn't implemented any different curves. Every single tyre compound in the game uses the same curve, and I was hoping that with all the data they have on tyres, they might have had different slip curves, torque curves for all the different tyres that they have in the game, but that doesn't seem to be the case. And all we're stuck with is basically the ability to make this curve taller or shorter, and that's about it. So that's the pneumatic torque I'm getting tongue-tied now, but pneumatic torque scale, or pneumatic trail scale, or whatever it's called. Basically just tunes that, and this is where the balancing act comes in, because this blue line is basically what is output to the steering wheel in force feedback. So depending on what you're trying to achieve, you need to balance these three settings accordingly. If you want like severe, like a really light wheel when you're understeering, you want less mechanical trail torque, because then that way, and obviously when you're reducing one torque, you want to either increase the other one or increase the aligning torque scale, because otherwise the force feedback is going to become much weaker. So if you max both the settings out, you want to reduce this, because you know the two scales combined, when they become force feedback, is going to be much higher if you just completely max the settings out. So it's just something you need to be aware of, that if you max all the sliders out, you're going to get severe clipping. You need to balance them accordingly. So yeah, if you turn the mechanical trail completely off and you just want to feel the tyre, you'll need to boost up the pneumatic trail scale, and if it's still not enough, boost up the aligning torque scale as well, and then if need be, the force feedback scale on top of that. So you'll be able to feel, you know, a very sharp build up of force, and then it'll very quickly drop off, and you'll understeer very easily on this sort of setup, because as soon as the wheel loses force, you have a tendency to turn it further, which only makes you understeer even more. So I tend to avoid this sort of force feedback. Myself personally, I like to aim for, as we boost this up, and we need to reduce this down to bring that back into play, I like to have a force feedback for racing and hot lapping that builds up to peak, drops off just before the peak slip angle, and then drops off a little bit more to indicate understeer, but doesn't drop off severely. So we get maybe a 40-50% max drop off in force from the peak steering torque that's applied to the wheel. Any more than that, and to me it just feels like those low end forces are not enough to maintain decent control of the car. And then when I'm drifting, I like to basically reduce that drop off even further, because the more this drops off, the slower the wheel will rotate when it's trying to self-align the car. So what I'll do when I'm drifting is I'll tend to, I've lost sight of my sliders here, I'll tend to drop this right down, just so that the drop off is very minimal, so I can rely on the wheel, no matter what the tyres are doing, that it's going to try and turn back and point in the direction I want it to go. And that's basically the rundown of those three scales, those new scales that have been added. So basically the way I would do it is find your balance between mechanical and pneumatic, and then adjust your aligning torque scale to make good use of the range of force feedback that your wheel has, and then use force feedback scale last, because force feedback scale is going to boost up any other sensations that come through the wheel as well. So, and if you want to have a play with these graphs, you can. If you just copy this link up the top here, I might leave that in the description of the video. You'll be able to see these curves, and basically if you want to hide any of the lines, you just click on the sides there and you can hide different portions, because we have one line in here that's hidden at the moment, which is the lateral force, which is where all these curves are being calculated from. It's just a generalized lateral force curve that's generated by a car, a fictional car, and then we've generated some pneumatic and mechanical torque curves from that. Anyway, that's going to wrap up the video. I hope you found it useful, and leave it a thumbs up if you did. Comment down below if you have any questions, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.